Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Mikkel Thorup, and this is the Expat Money Show. Today's guest is the founder of Actual Fluency, a language learning blog and podcast that he has started in 2014 and has over 180 episodes. He is a passionate entrepreneur who specializes in affiliate marketing, sales funnels, and copywriting. And he's originally from Denmark and has lived all over Europe and is now an expat in Portugal. Please welcome to the show, my friend, Kris Broholm. Kris, how are you, my friend?
I'm great. Thank you so much for that really warm introduction.
Well, my pleasure. My goodness, we've been friends for probably, I want to say like 2 years maybe. And I don't know how I have not had you on the show yet. So shame on me for not getting you on before after 101 different conversations about love and life and everything in between. But you're here now, so I'm really excited about today. So I guess before we kind of get into the topic at hand of expat, and I want to hear all about your adventures, how did you get into, I guess, language learning and entrepreneurship? And we'll save the expat stuff for after, maybe.
Sounds good. And that's actually also quite appropriate with my life. I'm quite a late expat by many of these new modern programming teenagers who are just jumping all across the world, programming on the beach, and you know the image. You know, my journey started a long time when I was about 18, and I was really not looking forward to a traditional career route, like a 9-to-5. Actually, that scared me, and to a degree still scares me today, this kind of stuck in the same kind of loop with no freedom and, 2 weeks off a year for holidays and things like that. So I knew back then I wanted to do something entrepreneurial, and it took me, pretty much 10 years to figure out how to do that. Going through such ridiculous things as playing poker professionally, and I had a blog about kitchen cabinets, and I had a blog about World of Warcraft. I just went through all the motions, and eventually I was just like, hey, I used to really like languages in school. Why don't I make a blog about that? And I made a podcast right away as well. And I built that from 2014 to today, where we last year had a result of in the 6-figure range. So that was, it's been a long way coming, and it's not been a success from day one, but that's kind of the mindset that brought me to where I am today, just experimenting with a lot of different things and a lot of website building and online marketing, emails and everything like that. So that's pretty much where it came from.
Well, it's so funny because I'm very similar in the same way that I tried 1,000 different ideas in the entrepreneur niche before settling, quote unquote, on the expat niche. And it's like, well, this is something that I was doing anyway, something that I was already passionate about, something that I knew already so much about. And here I'm out there trying to create brand new things and things I didn't care about because I thought it would make me a lot of money. And it actually wasn't until I focused on things that I already knew and understood and was part of my life that actually I started to have real success.
It's important, and I was my parents always said, oh, you've got such an ear for languages. And I was back already when I was 11 years old, we were playing a lot of video games, and there weren't really that many Danish language video games out there. So we had to learn English, there's no chance. We had to do it to defeat these games. And by age 11, my inner monologue had changed to English. So for me, the language niche was always obvious. And, it's a great niche because it's something you don't have to be an expert at a foreign language to enjoy the benefits of it. So it's not like you have to learn everything about a language before you can use it. And also there's a huge market, right? The language learning industry is I think it's something like a $5-6 billion industry every year, where people buy books and courses and apps, and you've probably seen all the language schools around, and so it just made sense.
I've certainly spent my share of that $6 billion
in
my journey in languages. Yeah. So yeah, I guess
it's not easy. It's not easy. So it's a cool topic, and there's a lot of flexibility in how you want to do it. And of course, you can talk about your own native language, or you can learn about other languages, or bring in people who know about that and provide the type of content that you feel comfortable with, whether that's a video, YouTube.
It's so funny that actually you say that, because okay, we're having this conversation today in English. And I swear to God, if you ever told anybody that English was not your first language, I'm actually mind blown when you remind me
Right.
of that right now, because I never speak to you as if I'm speaking to someone who speaks English as a second language. And my wife speaks English as a second language, and I talk to her in a different way than I talk to someone I would speak to as a native speaker. I mean,
Right.
that's pretty wild. Like, I've hired you to
It's a good
help
business
me
card, right?
in copywriting before, to help me with my business, and you speak English as a second language. Like, that's rad, man. That's good for you. That's props.
Well, thank you. And like I said, it's a great business card, right? But the funny thing is that I it's hard to replicate that because like I said, it was at a time where all the games as a kid, you just want to do good in your hobbies, right? And we were playing a lot of video games. So that was the example I gave. And then when I grew up, I really grew up with online gaming, So if I'd been born 10 years younger, I'm not sure I would have had the same level of English because you just didn't have that community. But from maybe, I don't know, 10 until 18, I would log on every day and speak English to people. And so that's why it's really hard to replicate in other languages.
And
You really need
probably
to
if you
have
were
that
born 10 years later, then it would have been, they would have had translations in the game, and you would have had all of the text
Right.
that came up in Danish. So maybe that also would have not been good
Absolutely.
for you, and you wouldn't be in the same place. Have you ever read the
Absolutely.
book by Malcolm Gladwell called Outliers?
No, I haven't. Only like summaries and what people have told me about
It's a
it.
very interesting book. What they do, or what he does, is he's talking about super famous people who were born at the very right time, that had the right situation, the right family, the right everything that lined up that allowed them to be super successful. Why was Steve Jobs Steve Jobs?
Right.
Why are these hockey players and baseball players, why are they able to do this thing? If they were, like you said, born 10 years previous or 10 years later, then it wouldn't necessarily fit. They drill it down so
Yeah,
much that it could be a couple of months or 1 year difference, and they wouldn't have had that same type of results.
I agree. I think that a lot of the success that people have, especially talking about online success, it's really about leveraging your unique and unfair advantage, whatever that may be. And then you put in a lot of hard work, and then with any luck, you get somewhere. There's no guarantee of success if you put in hard work, but if you combine it with your unfair advantage, for me, that might have been my command of the English language. I don't know, but I also played with websites for 10 years before I started Actual Fluency. So tinkering with design and copy and all these things, I just hit it at the right time. And similarly, people are going to have that experience with all sorts of niches, like health, for instance. If you're really into keto, there was this huge spike at some point, right? Where everyone and their mom wanted to be on the keto diet. Well, if you've been talking about that for a few years and you researched everything there is to be known about keto, then obviously you'd be massively successful. So it's always going to be the random chance plus hard work plus your unique secret sauce, unfair advantage.
For sure, for sure. Well, I'm certainly noticing that in my space. I mean, I've been talking about asset protection, about moving overseas for years and years now. And it was like, I mean, not so popular. A lot of people didn't really care. They're like, well, I live in the United States. It's the greatest country in the world. What do I need to worry about a second residency for? And then fast forward 2021, and look what happens. I mean,
Yeah.
they can't even get their US passport, let alone a second passport. The delays are by months. The FBI checks for fingerprinting is delayed by 4 months, 5 months, something
Wow.
like that. So even
It's
when you
crazy.
want to get one of these residencies, you can't get the documentation in place. Like, it's just a mess. So, I mean, for me, I'm already established in this niche. I can imagine tons of people wanting to get into it now. And it's like, you know, yeah, you can follow
Yeah.
someone who's brand new, who has no experience in it and is trying to cash in, or you follow me or like a couple of other people in the space who have been doing this for years when no one was listening. And now, yeah, it's super popular. I mean, I look at
There
my
you
numbers,
go.
they've gone through the roof. So it just
I
goes to
mean,
show you.
you're at a perfect time with all this, digital nomadism is at its highest. Remote working is now going to take off because all the businesses have realized, hey, nobody's been in the office for 8 months. Why are we paying for this? So you can
Exactly.
save that expense and maintain most of the productivity. So you're going to see an explosion, I think, in the next 12 months of remote workers looking for, where do I go? What kind of visas do I need? What kind of bank setups can I do? And that's what you talk about. So yeah, you're in a great spot, but you wouldn't be able to just start that today.
Exactly.
Even with the knowledge, you've built it up over the years. So now you have this great, you said 150 episodes of the podcast, right? And just a wealth of information available for people. So yeah, you got the hard work. You're definitely one of the hardest workers I know. You're traveling right now, right? And you're still doing this from an Airbnb and keeping the show going, keeping the content creation going. So, I mean, you're doing everything right. It's not just the random, good timing. It's also the hard work you put in.
Well, thank you very much, Kris. I appreciate that. I was telling Kris before this episode that we had a big problem with the Airbnb that we're in. So he was messaging me this morning. Like, I heard about your problems with the Airbnb. Are we still doing the interview? I was like, hell yeah, I got a second Airbnb in a quiet place so we can record today. I'm not missing this. I'm looking forward to this.
That's beautiful. I'm a podcaster myself, as you mentioned before, and I still have a little bit of a fear talking to people who are on the podcast. So every time there's an excuse to postpone or do it later, I'm definitely easily tempted to, let's do it tomorrow.
Put it off a little bit. 180 episodes, though. I would have imagined that you were kind of past that. I remember that feeling. I do remember that feeling. But
well, it's hard when you travel as well, I find that. But again, that's the difference between the two of us, right? That you're managing it's not even a question. Of course I'll do it. Whereas for me, I feel like in the beginning of my podcast, I was like that. It was like one episode a week. And then when I got to like 150, 180, that coincided with big life changes for me, like moving abroad. And I just struggled to maintain that consistency. But I haven't stopped doing it. It's not canceled by any means. It's just I'm no longer doing it on a weekly basis.
Well, I think that part of the thing for me that makes podcasting very easy is technically it is my full-time gig. I mean, it's what I do for a living. I mean, I earn money from this podcast, and I have people who support my show, and it helps get my name and my word out there for my services. And I mean, it's free to listen to, but it's not free to produce. And I do have it's my marketing arm for my business. So even if I did feel like, oh, you know what, I don't really feel like it today, it's like, no, but I mean, I made a commitment and people are expecting something from me and I've got bills to pay. So I'm going to make sure I get this stuff done. Like, it's important.
Absolutely. And the hardest part of doing that is when you're beginning, because then you're not going to get paid a lot, if anything. So that's when you have to really just go through with it, right? And I guess that's where I was most consistent, which is kind of funny, now that the business is doing really well, then I'm sort of less motivated to keep doing that weekly thing. But back when I was doing no money, then I was just doing it, week after week after week. I think I had something like, 2 years of unbroken weekly episodes. So that's kind of funny how that is. But
well, you don't know. Maybe after today's interview, you're going to sit down, Kris, and you're going to go, you know what? I should be more like my friend Mikkel, and I should make sure that this is a weekly thing. I've listened to your podcast. You do an awesome podcast, man. Your podcast is phenomenal. You should do it weekly. I mean,
well, thank you.
It's important.
I will
stuff.
use your inspiration to get back to the weekly episodes.
My pleasure. So, all right. So let's get into the expat thing, because you started the podcast, you started the blog, the language acquisition. You're a polyglot. You started all of these types of things before you were an expat, while you were living in Denmark, right? So, what
That's
was
true.
kind of the change or the journey to become an expat?
Well, I suppose the elephant in the room we should address is, why would anyone want to leave Denmark?
Ooh, yes.
The socialist example that even American media is using. Why can't we be more like Denmark? And the happiest nation on earth and all this nonsense. I think Denmark is a great place. It's beautiful. It's very in general, I call it very nice. It's very stable. It's very It's very easygoing. People are very friendly. I've spent 25 years there of my 33-year life, so I am very familiar with it. But what I think I was missing was some sort of adventure or excitement or just something out of the ordinary. Denmark is a very homogeneous country as well. So I always knew that inside I wanted to get out of Denmark and experience something else. Obviously, also there are practical things like the weather sucks. Taxes are ridiculously high, like higher than you could ever imagine. And I don't feel like you get that much better of a lifestyle. If you have a job there, like you work for a Danish company, it's usually not a problem because the salary is accordingly higher, so it's not a big deal. But if you, like me, work online and I get paid or make the same amount of money living in Portugal or Panama or Hungary, whatever, than doing in Denmark, then I'm just basically giving myself a negative 40 to 50% raise.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make 50% less, yay. So those were some of the decisions I was thinking about, but I think ultimately it was just like getting out, get some perspective, and see the world, and go on an adventure, and try to see what else was out there. So that was where I started, and I was doing the business. And as I was telling you before, I was desperate to come up with some entrepreneurial success that could actually give me that freedom. And I think freedom for me is the most important thing of all. It's the freedom to do, freedom of movement, freedom of time. Those are the most important things for me. So as soon as I got that, I was looking at where can I go and do this. So that's why I decided to go to Hungary first, in Budapest. And of course, it has to be said, with a European passport, it's quite a privilege. And I know a lot of people don't have that same available to them, but I could go to all of the member states of the EU and stay and work without any visa or any problems. So that helps. But that's when I decided to go to Budapest. And I had a job of online moderation. So I would monitor like Twitter pages and Facebook pages, respond to people. It was basically like customer service with a bit of moderation. So if people put like, bad pictures on the page, or, bad comments, you delete them and stuff like that. So I could build my business alongside, and also have a more or less guaranteed salary. So it was kind of a stepping stone for where I am today.
Well, Hungary, I mean, big difference in the tax structure there between that country and Denmark. I mean, I think it's 9% corporate tax off the top of my head.
And they had this great freelancer tax, which I think they still have. It's basically a flat tax rate of you pay kind of a small amount up to, as long as you don't earn over a high amount of money. I can't remember the exact figures, but because it's flat rate, there's a band where it's very advantageous to be there. And that's the system I was under. Also because the reporting requirements are very low. So if you're looking for a place in Europe to potentially, Budapest is beautiful and it's very affordable, and people are very nice there. So if you are looking for a place, do check out Budapest and see if they still have that freelancer tax. I believe they do, but obviously I'm not a tax advisor in any way. So,
So I mean, I've had calls with tax advisors and lawyers and accountants and service providers in Hungary before. I mean, I have all of those contacts. If people are looking for them, you feel free to reach out to me. I don't mind passing you along. They do have some great tax structures there. I think that some of the problems with Hungary, though, is for the incorporation. You actually have to have a Hungarian bank account, and to open the Hungarian bank account, you have to be there in person. Where normally we do like the IBCs and stuff. Like, I mean, you can just order them online and you'd pay and send your KYC AML documents. You don't have to go there to open the bank account. But Hungary, you have to be there, and you have to be there within like short amount of time, like 2 months or a month or something like that. You have to be really, really organized. But I think that for company formation and from that business side, I think is quite good. And then obviously for beauty side, I mean, Budapest is stunning.
It's wonderful. Yeah. That's why actually it's a funny story. I'd packed off my bags in Denmark, and I was like, okay, I'm going to make this big expat move. I think I had 2 big check-in bags. That was my entire life, all my belongings. And I had this sort of small language conference in Hungary. A few of my friends organized. So I booked a flight from Denmark to Budapest, and then from Budapest to Berlin, because I thought I was going to settle down in Berlin. It was kind of popular. It still is. It's a very hipster city. It has this reputation of soy lattes and designers everywhere. But at that time, it was just a little bit more up and coming, and I thought, oh, okay, that could be cool. I speak German too, so I go there. But as I was in Budapest, it was so beautiful. The weather was fantastic, and it was such an adventure because I didn't understand anything in Hungarian. Like every sign was like it might as well be like, ancient Mayan scripture or something. It was just really exciting to be there. And I just thought, I'll just stay here. I canceled the last leg of the trip. And so it's also unexpected for me to end up there. But yeah, it is truly a great place if you have the opportunity to stay there. And I think in terms of business setups, I don't know if I would necessarily set up the business there. If you have the possibility to set up business in Europe, I'm sure, Mikkel, there are better countries where you can, not necessarily offshore, but sort of, you don't have to be there, non-residential.
It's one of those things that makes sense for certain businesses and not for others. I mean, for people who need to enter the European Union and want to have a European bank account, or need to have a registered company so that they can get their banking done in another country, I mean, it's a pretty good option. I think some of the other problems are that their legal system there is kind of a mix between common law and civil law. Like it's like they haven't picked lanes. They're not exactly sure what they're doing. And there's all this other weird law that you just would never be able to predict. It's just, as a foreigner, I mean, going in, it's very, very complicated. Usually it's like if you're doing common law, you're doing common law, whether it's the UK or New Zealand or Australia or Singapore, or, I mean, there's so many similarities there that you can understand. I think Hungary is this weird mix.
Yeah, I don't know if I would ultimately recommend it for a long-term stay. I think you'd have to do your research on your own personal position before I would make that suggestion. But I can say at least that for a short-term stay, it's absolutely fantastic and beautiful.
So how long were you there for?
I was there for 18 months, actually. When I moved there, I actually thought I was just going to stay there sort of in perpetuity. But after about 18 months, I moved back to Denmark for a while. And then I moved back to, but then I moved to the UK, which was my next sort of expat location.
All right. Before we get into the UK, did you study Hungarian language when you were in Hungary?
I did, not extensively. And I will say it's the hardest language I've ever seen anything of. Wow. If anyone knows anything about Hungarian, I mean, it's impossible basically, but it's also very cool. It's
a language blogger telling you that the language is impossible. Chris, come on. I thought that was like you weren't allowed to do that. Like they're gonna crucify you now.
I'm only human, For me, it was impossible, and no, it wasn't impossible. But I think Hungarian has this quality where all the meaning is attached to the end. They call it agglutinative, and that makes it extremely complicated because you have to remember what do all these endings mean. And I feel like there's a lot of kind of myths about language learning. And one of them is that if you go to the country, you'll easily learn the language. And actually what I found was that it was a lot easier for me to study in Denmark because I didn't have the worries of moving countries was. It was my first, I say my first, it's really my fifth language or something, 4th or 5th maybe at the time, probably 5th language, yeah. But it was my first sort of in-country experience of studying a new language. And I really underestimated, of course, when I went there, I was like, oh yes, I'm going to learn Hungarian in 3 months, no problem. But when I got there, I really was underestimating the energy required to obviously run my business, but also setting up all the paperwork, all the bank nonsense, all the tax nonsense, trying to make friends. You're going to a brand new country, you're all alone. Like, how do you build up a social network? How do you make sure that you're finding an apartment. You know, some of these countries are very hard to find apartments because they have very strict rules, or you might need to present a credit score, or you might need to sub rent from other people. And so as I lived there, I felt like time just flew past, and I just didn't have the mental energy to dedicate particularly a lot of time for Hungarian. And so at the end, I didn't really manage to do very well.
Well,
But of course, I can order
all
a
right. So
coffee.
here's an interesting point. Let's slow down. Let's talk about this for a little bit, because it is really interesting. I'll tell you from my experience, when I go through all of this stuff, banking and companies and apartments and grocery shopping and finding a place where I can get coffee and the electricity, you get through all of this stuff, and it's like, at the end of the day, I mean, it's exhausting. Like, it's so exhausting. And then you meet someone, you go to the pub and you meet an Irish guy or something like that. I mean, to me, like, I sit around and drink a couple of Guinness and talk in English. I don't necessarily practice my language. I moved to Panama. I have to do 1,001 things. I've got a business and a family and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And at the end of the night, I mean, yeah, I know that I should be studying Spanish, or I should message my buddy who's Panamanian who only speaks Spanish and go and play pool with him. Or I could message my buddy Luigi and go, go for a cocktail or something like that and speak English. And it's just so natural and easy. I mean, there is a certain amount that you can handle in a day. I mean, everybody's a little bit different, but everybody still does have a limit. So it's, how are you going to handle those things? So I think it's natural, personally.
Yeah, and part of that experience is also accepting that, that you're not going to be fluent in 3 months, especially when you just move. But yeah, giving yourself time. And what I did notice was that the second half of my stay in Hungary, I did suddenly have more energy and time to do the language. So I had a weekly tutor for a while, maybe even twice a week. And I would put in regular study sessions. But then my stay in Hungary came to an end, and I could sort of see a few months ahead and say, okay, I know I'm going back to Denmark at this date. So I lost a little bit of motivation as well, because you're not going to need Hungarian outside of Hungary. So that was kind of my story of Hungarian. But it's a fun experience, and I could go to a cafe and do the whole exchange in Hungarian. I can make everyone laugh a little bit if I'm trying to say a few words, and that was well worth it for me. And again, going back to what I said earlier, you don't need to be an expert in the language to get a lot of pleasure out of it. So for me, the funniest thing was going to a cafe a little bit out of town, and trying to make a sandwich in Hungarian. You had like a whole basically 30 different ingredients you can put in your sandwich, and I didn't know the Hungarian name for any of them. So and the staff behind the desk are just like snickering, and that's hilarious. I love that. It's great that you can make an impact on their day too, as long as you of course allow yourself to be the kind of the idiot in the room. You have to have a good sense of self-awareness.
But that's another good point, that to get joy from a language, you don't actually need to be fluent. You certainly don't need to be perfect, but you don't need to be fluent. I mean, even small things, like I learned words in Swahili, and I learned words in Nepalese, and I learned words in Korean that I was able to use. And yeah, just getting a smile out of somebody when they look at me and I am clearly not Korean, and it's like, that's fun. I mean, it doesn't have to always be about fluency, even though, I mean, your podcast is called Actual Fluency, but I think that you will probably agree with me that all spectrums of language learning can derive joy.
Actually, yeah, absolutely. And the name actually is based on where do you want to be? Do you want to be a language expert? So what is your level of actual fluency? Is it conversational? Is it you want to write a doctorate in the language? And I think it has to be a personal decision. And there's also a big debate on whether fluency actually means perfect, or it just means like able to have a conversation. So you have a lot of drama there. But for non-language
Yeah, I think that's part of the
I think
polyglot community arguing over other people's YouTube videos, and
semantics,
yeah.
basically. Yeah, you're right. You're right. It's quite toxic. So I wouldn't advise anyone to spend any time on that. But in general, you want to make your language goals yours. You don't want to look at a YouTube video of someone speaking perfectly and then go, I can do that in 3 months. It's just not possible. You want to do it according to what you can do, your experience, and your time, of course.
Well, so I have quite a few friends who are polyglots, who are polyglot podcasters and producers of content in this space that, people you've introduced me to, or, mutual friends and stuff like that. And so I have a little bit of a glimpse into the world of the polyglot space. And it is so funny because I just wouldn't expect there would be so much bickering between people on, like on conversations like this, like what is fluent? How long does it take to learn a language? And all this back and forth, you can search on YouTube, I learned French in a week or something. And then it's like, and then other people making response videos like, this is ridiculous and you can't do this. And it's so funny because I love language learning and it has become a massive passion of mine over the last few years, but it's not my niche. So I'm the outsider looking in, but it's funny. Very, very funny.
A lot of drama for sure.
I think any type of hobby that people have, there's this insider stuff that you can kind of see. And it really, we could be having this conversation about cars or paintball or I have no idea, like anything.
Expat life, I suppose, has lots of these very divisive topics where people disagree a lot. Let's say taxation, for instance. So yeah, you're right. You probably find it anywhere.
We do. We certainly do. I think
that's important. Taxes, it became a big decision for me as part of my where to go. And I don't know how many of your listeners have this feeling. I don't know how common it is to think like, I don't know where to go. But I think that's quite of an interesting decision because I have the belief that I should go where people treat me the best, or countries specifically, I suppose. But it's always difficult to find, there's no perfect package, there's always going to be, pros and cons of certain countries. I think for Europe, I think Portugal is very strong. That's why I ended up here. I don't know, maybe we can talk about that for a second. I was sitting in Denmark and I researched this. They have this very good tax system called the NHR, which is a non-habitual residence. But it basically allows you to have foreign income taxed at 0%. So you set up a company in another place, and then the income you get there through dividends is taxed at 0%. So that was what drew
how many
me.
years?
10 years. Sorry, yeah, that's correct. And they are talking about phasing this out, I believe. So be sure to check that out. But it's become very popular, and I think it's a fantastic idea. I don't understand why countries don't do more to promote people working online to come to their country and spend money. For instance, if I lived in Denmark, there's a part of me that would probably live in Denmark if the deal was good enough. But they're going to tax me. They're going to yeah, there you go. They're going to tax me the same as if I had a well-paid job there. So they're just losing me as a customer for VAT and property taxes and all the other taxes that governments charge. In Denmark, it's pretty ridiculous with sugar tax and alcohol tax and tax on everything, basically. Just assume it's going to be taxed. But then a country like Portugal is like, hey, what about we make the conditions really great for people to come here? And they're going to spend all their money on taxable goods. And they might even hire locals to grow their business, and they're going to buy property. They're going to invest in the infrastructure. To me, it's just a complete no-brainer. I don't understand why governments around the world aren't doing this.
You preach into the choir, my friend. You preach into the choir.
Yeah, this is like a
don't get it either.
but I guess my point with all that. It's Portugal.
I like the countries who actually do recognize this. You'll see this with a lot of the territorial tax countries, and the benefits are apparent. I mean, you're not only attracting dollars, capital into the country, you're attracting that talent. I mean, entrepreneurs, by and large, are really great people. I mean, we are problem solvers. We're law-abiding citizens. We want to do well and inspire people and help people. I mean, that is the fundamentals of being an entrepreneur. If you don't want to help someone, then you're probably going to be a pretty crummy entrepreneur. So by getting those people in the country, there's this other layer of benefit that, I mean, is non-quantifiable. I mean, I certainly see it in Panama, where I normally live. I'm not there at the moment, but I mean, it's just tons of entrepreneurs, tons of business owners have moved there because it's an attractive tax jurisdiction. We have zero taxes if you earn your money online. I mean, that's great. I still go to the grocery store. I still have a maid. I still, buy a place and, use the local services. So all the money is coming into that country. That I'm not taking anything from out of the country. I mean, all my clients are in the US and Canada, and same as you. So, I mean, it's good. It actually brings money to the country.
Yeah, and look at the reverse, right? You have really high tax rates or really unfair, uncompetitive tax rates, then people leave. So you're basically enticing all your talent and all your, basically the people who are building the future huge businesses, you're enticing them to not be in your country. And it's like, it's just madness to me, but that's the way the world is right now.
It's called capital flight. And I mean, it happens. There's
Brain
studies
drain,
on a certain amount of taxes, and at a certain point, it tapers off and it becomes worse. And you can't just keep going higher and higher and higher.
No.
Like look at Denmark.
Yeah.
I mean, those are
that's
high.
Right. I would pay taxes in Denmark gladly.
Yeah.
And I think actually a lot of Danish people are content with paying high taxes because they know what they get in return. My problem is that comparatively, it's still too high. So I can go to the UK, for instance, which is, a 90-minute flight from Denmark, and I would immediately pay 50% less taxes. Plus, everything else is cheaper too.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
and still beautiful country and high standard of living. And it's not
if you
like
compare those two countries, they're equally developed. They have equal, both have social health care. So if you get sick, you don't have to pay hugely out of pocket. And in fact, the UK is doing it better in many cases. I can't speak for the quality of the service because that's too depending on what the part of the healthcare you're talking about. But one example is that in the UK, they have subsidized dental care. In Denmark, you pay full price yourself, unless you're part of a company insurance scheme. But in the UK, the maximum you can pay for one procedure is about $300, I believe, even though that same procedure would be could be $3,000 in Denmark, So why is it possible for two countries to be so similar in development, but one is able to do it for half the price and the other is not? That's my problem, really, because I think ultimately you want to live where you want to live. I don't think zero taxes is worth it at any cost. Like if you want to live in a jungle somewhere and have absolutely no modern advantages, but pay zero taxes, to me, that's not for me. I want to live in a place I'd really like to live in. And then the taxes is sort of a really big benefit, but it's never the entire reason, if you get what I mean.
I do. Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I have purposefully lived in zero tax countries for years and years and years. But at the same time, I never felt like I needed to go live out there in the jungle. Although after COVID, part of me wants to go and buy a homestead and be off the grid. Very much so. But
I think we all feel a bit like that.
Sorry, not sorry, but true story. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the UK. So you did go there as an expat. Now, totally different experience because you spoke English at a very high level before you went to the UK. So you didn't have those same types of challenges that you did in Hungary. But I imagine there were other challenges. There was other things that you needed to deal with.
Absolutely. And maybe that is uncovering the flaw of the original assessment, is that, the ducks in a row theory, that once I have all my ducks in a row, then I can learn the local language, or then I'll feel great, or then I can exercise, or then I can start watercolor painting, or whatever your long-term dreams are. But yeah, in the UK, I moved over, I got a job. And so I was still at a very early stage of my business. It was making a couple of thousand a month, but it wasn't enough to sustain myself. And I thought, if I get a job, then I could build up a social circle as well. So I actually got an office job in the UK whilst I worked on the business on the side, and had that for about a year and a half, maybe a little bit more. And then I went full time on the business with primarily one big client I was sort of marketing for, and then obviously worked on my own business as well. But you're right, yeah, it was different. And being in the UK was easier. And I think they have a very fair tax system in the UK, actually. If you're a low income earner, which my business definitely was at the time, the starting tax is only about 20%. And you get a very generous deduction. So that's if you do all your taxes in the country, of course. But you can set up somewhere else in Europe and save a little bit. But yeah, I like the UK. I was a big fan of the culture, like the food, I like the kind of even the humor. I always loved British TV. So going there was really an experience, and I had a good time there for the most part. But I think ultimately I realized I couldn't fit in properly at the end. It was just, there was something missing. Maybe it was the terrible weather, I don't know. But eventually I just moved on. And I think a big part of my expat experience is just trying things. Like, we were talking about with the businesses, I think you also just try countries. And even if there's no like big red flags or big good reasons for being there, there's just something, you feel deep down, this isn't me. This isn't for me.
Question for you. Do you think, are you searching for a place? Do you feel like you're searching?
It's a good question. I think one of the things I talked about on the podcast some time ago was, as an expat, how often are we moving towards something or running away from something else? And I think for me, for a long time, it has been the latter. I was kind of trying to get out of that cycle in Denmark of, let's say, the 9 to 5, or 40 years in a company and the gold watch and everything. But yeah, I think I'm still searching. I think it takes time as well. I've only been in Portugal for about 8 months now. So I think and the COVID situation has been mad. So I haven't really had the opportunity to explore much around here, let alone make friends or anything. But yeah, I would say that I am searching. I don't know if that's necessarily a healthy thing, but I just think that that's the way I am. That's the adventurous spirit in me, is like always try new things, like that Shakira song, try everything. And that's what I'm trying now. And maybe if you ask me again in 12 months, I maybe have a much better picture of whether or not Portugal is truly going to be my, let's say, 10-year plan or 20-year plan even.
Okay, let me rephrase the question and be a little bit more specific. Are you searching for the perfect place to be, the perfect place to live?
No, I wouldn't say so.
No.
Not necessarily, no. Because I understand there's always going to be pros and cons, but maybe I'm always comparing it to where I've lived in the past. So if I went to Romania tomorrow and tried living there for a while, maybe I'm comparing it to Portugal, to Hungary, and to the UK. And if it stacks up higher, or you make your big list of pros and cons, then maybe I would go there. But yeah, you're right. It's definitely not a search for perfection, because it just doesn't exist.
Good. I'm glad to hear you finish with that, because, all right, I've been an expat for a very long time, and I've lived in a lot of different places in the world. And at least from my side, from my life, I've never been one of those people who is running away from something, and I'm also not searching for anything. I actually like going to a new country and living in that country just for the differences. I like all the differences. And I'm like, I can objectively say, while living in Brazil today, this is better than Panama. This is worse than Panama. This is better than Panama. This is worse than Panama. Compare it. I can compare the types of things, but it's not like, oh, cross Brazil off the list. It doesn't have what I need. It didn't fit all these things. I'm still got to go out there and search for this mecca of expat living. I mean, for me, it doesn't exist. I see these lists all the time. Go back to our conversation about different drama and, groups talking crap. 5 best countries to live in here.
Yeah.
Oh, can you believe Mikkel put the UAE in there? It's like, yeah, I lived there for 8 years. For me, it was awesome. I like it. But I actually, to be fair, I don't really do lists on best countries, but I do get comments from people who question my judgment on what is a good place to live. It's like, well, I mean,
Don't you think there's a
things
big
that I
difference
like
between the timelines as well?
Yes.
You hear a lot about digital nomads, and initially I was attracted to that lifestyle. I was like, oh wow, living in a new country every 3 months, that sounds really exciting. I'm like, the adventure, but then, and I have friends like that who are, they can manage it somehow. They're just going from place to place, and they rent Airbnbs, and they have their online business. And I'm like, that was not for me.
Yes.
So I think it's really about maybe it's something about temperament towards travel. Like, what do you want to be? That kind of call it a nomad. This is kind of an overused term, but for me, I realized that I'd like a base, like a really solid base, and obviously that influences all your decisions, like your tax, bank, and everything. But now that I have my base here in Portugal, I can't wait to go and explore countries for weeks or even months at a time. That's the kind of life I want to live in a post-pandemic world.
That's the kind of life I live right now. So I definitely jive with that. I mean, and that's what I've always done. I mean, I did the backpacker. Long before digital nomad, we called ourselves backpackers. And literally, we just wore a backpack and went from place to place.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I'm looking forward to that, going on not necessarily the backpacking. I'm more of a comfort traveler myself, but going to be, and that's really the beauty of building an online business, is that you can go away. If I want to, I can go away for months at a time. The team will take care of the content and they'll funnel any important information through to me, so I can just log on my email every, once in a while, extinguish any fires, and then I'm still in wherever. Love to go to explore the US more. I haven't seen any part of the US. I've only been there a few times, a couple of weeks at a time, so you basically don't get any time to see anything. So I'm looking forward to that, but I think it's important to find out what kind of people listening to this, what is your view on that? Because some people can do it. Like my friend James, he's lived in like 15 different countries in the last 2 years, I think, and he gets a ton of work done. He's one of the most productive people I know. Whereas myself, if I try to do that, I would spend like 2 months settling in, and I would just be useless. So that's a discovery I've made. And so now when I travel, I'm not really looking at it as a potential new base. I'm just enjoying it for what it is: the culture, the food, the people, the sites, and history.
Well, don't you think that also there is a right time for a right place? Like maybe when you were in Hungary, that's what you needed at that time in your life. And when it stopped being that for you, you left. And the same in regards as the UK. You went there, you had fun, you met people, it was cool, you enjoyed yourself, you had the experience. And then when it was time to go, you moved on. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I wasted time there, or I made a mistake, it's like, it's a piece. And maybe you'll go back to those countries to live, and maybe you won't. And if you do, great. And if you don't, also cool. Like it doesn't have to mean something or have this
No.
overarching plan. I guess that's what I'm getting at is people seem to think that being an expat, like there has to be like a reason, it has to be a purpose. And if you don't get it right the first time, then I mean, if you wasted all this time and energy and effort and money, like
this is a funny question I've been getting lately about from people who hear that I moved to Portugal. A lot of people ask me, so how long you want to live there? And I'm like, well, what, like, why do I need to know? And why do I need to have an exit strategy?
Yeah.
Even if I have this tax setup, right? It's a 10-year plan.
Mm-hmm.
So in 10 years time, I will have to reevaluate my tax status.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd say, okay, well, a 10-year deadline might seem obvious, but to me, that's so far ahead in the future that I don't even consider it a deadline. Because frankly, if I've lived in Portugal for 10 years, I'm pretty confident that I'm happy to pay whatever tax rate they give me at that point. That's worth it. So I just don't understand that obsession. To me, I'm like, this is my permanent base for now.
Yeah.
But like you said, if things change, if something new comes up, or they could change the rules overnight retroactively. That's seen before. Mm-hmm. I'm out of here. And I think that's the biggest quality that expats have, and the biggest, I guess, power, because you have that freedom of movement, especially in the EU, I guess. But if you are an expat, you and you have your own online business, you have so much movement, opportunity of movement, so you could move. And that's the way I live my life. I'm not committing 100% at any cost to staying here for 10 years because that's the tax agreement. But for now, this is my home and this is my place, and I'm not looking.
But that same question that you proposed is the same type of question of, like, how long are you going to live there for? It could be the same question as how long are you going to live? Like, being an expat is really, for a lot of us, who we are. So it's like, I don't know, like, I want to live forever. So it's like, I want to be here forever. Question. But I mean, it's just a weird question, because
I also
when
think
you move, it's okay. It's just part of your life. You just live in a new country. It's good. It's all right.
That's it. And if you have a limited time in a place, like if you say, okay, I'm going to go and live in Hungary for 2 years, I feel like you don't commit enough to it. You're not going to commit to friendships.
Yeah.
You're not going to commit to actually getting a proper place to live. Mm-hmm. I've lived in a lot of temporary places. At the time I didn't know, but deep inside I knew I wasn't going to live there for a long time. Mm-hmm. So I didn't decorate it with my style. I didn't, buy the furniture that complemented my work. I didn't make an effort because I knew, right, I'm already on the way out. Mm-hmm. And I think if you constantly have this deadline in mind, you're not going to make deep friendships, deep connections. You're just going to be in this perpetual moving state that, you kind of living, but not really.
I know exactly what you were talking about. And actually, it's funny because I haven't thought about that in so long. But I remember when I lived in New Zealand, I had a 12-month visa to be there. And so I lived out of a suitcase the entire time. Yeah. When I lived in the Arctic, I knew I had a 1-year contract. I was going to be there for 365 days. So it was really hard to allow myself to live my life, because I kept thinking, well, what's the point? What's the point of putting a picture on the wall? I'm only going to have to take it down in 6 months. What's the point of buying this nice chili sauce that I want because I may only eat it once in the next month and then I need to go? So you're constantly stopping yourself from, okay, those are really silly examples, but I mean, there's big examples, friends and spouses and girlfriends and all these types of things as well, sports and hobbies and so much stuff that you want to do. But actually, when I was in the UAE, I didn't have that feeling. I went to the UAE and I was like, this is my life. That was probably 10 years into my expat journey before I got that. And now I'm like, I don't care. I mean, I have so much stuff here in Brazil, you wouldn't believe it. And I know it's temporary here, but I just allow myself to buy the things and fill my fridge and make friends and I don't care. I mean, it took me a long time to get that, for sure.
Yeah, it's not easy, because the natural response would be to, it's temporary. And by the way, even if you don't have those set deadlines, it's very helpful to say, okay, my visa is 3 months. I know I'll be here for 3 months. Mm-hmm. But for me, it was also working in an office job. I knew how much I hated working in an office and how much I desired my freedom. So even there, I'm already kind of working on borrowed time in that job, even
You
though
had
there
one
was
foot
no,
out the door. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It wasn't like a limited contract, and I wasn't getting fired or anything. Um, so there was no real deadline. But deep down, I knew I can't go on with this. This isn't what my life is supposed to be. I want to do something else.
Mhm.
So it's tough. There's nothing easy about any of this. I find it's a very hard journey, really. But it's synonymous with bettering yourself in other ways too. Like language learning is a way of bettering yourself. I feel like connecting with people, there's health and fitness and building a business. They're all connected to this overall picture of self-improvement and building the life you want. Which is what people get out of listening to a podcast like this. They get experiences and anecdotes and even, very technical, this is how you do it. So you build that kind of, oh, okay, he did it. He was from Wisconsin, or, he lived in Buffalo and then he did all this great stuff. And, people listening will get this, build their own version of what expat life or a future free, it might not be expat, maybe you want to live in the US, or I don't know, or wherever you're listening from, but you can still apply all the principles, whether you live in New York City or you live in the UAE or in Portugal. It's all about bettering yourself and figuring out what you want out of life.
Being purposeful about these things, where you're going to spend your time, how you're going to dedicate your life, the languages you're going to learn, the cultures, how you're going to structure these things. I think that's at the core of it. And I think that as my expat journey has continued, I've really realized it is a philosophy. There's so much to it. I mean, you can't just go to the dictionary and look up the word expat and know what it means. Like, I mean, it's just, you can't. I know it sounds so silly, but it's like, I've been at this for 21 years, and every day I am discovering things about myself. My drama here in Brazil, which people have been following along with me in social media, is absolutely crazy. And at night, I just have to hug my wife and just be like, it's okay. Everything will be okay. We will get through all of this.
It works out in the long
run. It just
run.
works out. It does, yeah.
Like you said, Hungary, UK, my past, it's all leading up to this point, so I don't see them as failures. I just tried something and then I didn't do it anymore. I stopped doing it because it wasn't.
But it helps shape you as a human being as well. Like, even if you can't tell the difference, it's still there. There's layers of all of those experiences who are you now. And actually, there's no way to separate those things. But it's really funny. And I'm curious your take, because I know you go home on a semi-regular basis. When you go back to Denmark and you see your buddies or your friends from school or your folks or your cousins and things like that, how do you feel? How do you feel about the situations or about life back home?
Whoa, that's a big one. I think you have to find out for yourself, right? So part of what we just talked about was me going to Hungary, and I think you'd agree with me to say that you have a lot of ideas in your head about what you like, especially when it comes to where to live and how to live. But as you try things, those perceptions change completely. So for me, living in the UK, living in Budapest, I learned so much about myself that I think specifically things I didn't want. You kind of filtering your earlier perceptions. I was like, oh, I really like this, I really like that, and now I realize, okay, actually I don't want that. So the travel is an example, right? I thought I'm going to be the next digital nomad moving every 3 months. That could be so cool. And then I tried traveling a lot and I was like, no, this sucks for me. This is not this is not what I want to do. So when I go home to Denmark, first of all, I try to get back about maybe 3 to 4 times a year, depending. There's Christmas is the obvious one, and then there's a couple of birthdays, and in general, just every quarter would be great if I could do that. Sometimes I don't, but when I go home, there's a big split. Like there's a lot of people I see back home who I think are very happy, with where they are. They really like let's say they have a job, they really like their job, they have family and friends and kids. But there's also a big part of people who I can just see they don't know anything about themselves because they haven't traveled. They haven't been outside Denmark maybe ever, or maybe they went to like Turkey on a beach resort. And there's no offense about that. I'm not trying to judge people, but if you haven't tried to live abroad, it can be very hard to find out who you are as a person. So sometimes that's painful when you're back home. And I think perspective is often very one-sided. And I also feel like a foreigner when I'm back home, which is kind of weird.
This reverse culture shock when you go back, and it's like
absolutely
things that used to be completely normal now kind of look a bit weird, and the conversations and not the conversation, but the topics and the themes, like we've been talking about this since we were 16 years old.
Right.
It's been like 30 years now, and you guys are still telling the same stories. Like, it's so strange.
I just don't understand the mindset anymore. I don't know if I ever had it or if it's just something that you grow out of, but it's just like, for me, traveling is like the best thing you can do. And it's the most exciting thing to discover new places, new people. Like meeting people all around the world, for me, is like the number one joy. It's so cool to hear about other people's experiences and perspectives on things. And I think it shapes you. And there's just a lot of people I know from back home, for example. And again, no judgment. If you don't like traveling, then don't do it. But they have a very limited perspective on things. And that hurts when you get back because you just don't connect with it. And you get that reverse culture shock, as I mentioned. So that's the downside. But of course, it's also really good to be home. And I don't know about you, but I always miss like certain foods and stuff. It's so weird when you're living at home.
Denmark,
you don't think about
because
it.
I think Denmark has some really deep culture and some really unique things. Canada, I mean, I can't think of any Canadian food which I miss from Canada that I couldn't prepare myself or just go down the street to a restaurant and kind of get. I mean, we don't have that type of thing. All right, someone's going to make a joke about maple syrup or Canadian bacon or something. But I mean, like, those are so small little things. You could, if you really care, you can pick that kind of stuff up abroad.
Yeah. Well, Canada's so big that you might even get Canadian products most of the world anyway. Exactly. But it's harder to find the Danish products. But I think it's more of a, I mean, the food doesn't really matter, but it's obviously partly sentimental. You're reminiscing about your former country. And, right now they're playing the football, the European Championships, and Denmark has made it to the quarterfinal somehow. They're usually not very good. We won it in '92, so that gives you an idea of when they were last any good. But now that I'm seeing that, I'm still a Danish citizen. I'm still a Danish patriot in a way deep down. It's not like I haven't defected. It's still there, and I still love Denmark for all of its benefits. And you hear I still follow the news and stuff. So I don't think being an expat means that you just forget about who you are, or you just leave that part of your personality behind. I think it adds to it and it molds it in a different way.
Yeah, I think that the roots that the state put in us are very, very strong, and it's very difficult to get rid of them. I've been overseas longer than I spent in Canada. More than half of my life I've been an expat. And I don't know.
But you still have, I'm sure you still have emotional ties. And like, if you hear the Canadian national anthem, don't you get a bit of
that one I don't
nice
care
feeling
about at all. I mean, just celebrated Canada's birthday. I didn't do anything. I actually forgot all about it. And those types of things I don't really care about. But like, okay, let's take an example like your sports. If I'm watching the Olympics, I'm cheering for Canada. I want to see those kids, those athletes do well. Absolutely, I do. I guess because I see that more as not necessarily patriotic, but just I want
how would
to
you
root
feel
for
about Denmark,
someone
then?
and do something good. Yeah, and I feel the same about Denmark too. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you think I mean, obviously I'm a very pure Danish person, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's kind of a boring backstory. But as far as we can trace back to like the 1600s, there are no foreigners in my family tree, so that's kind of boring.
Mhm.
But so I can only be attached to one place in my, let's say, deepest down, right? Yeah, I was born in Denmark, I lived there forever. That's who I am. That's part of my personality, right? But for you, I would think that having that heritage is also something to be proud of. So you kind
It
of,
is.
you have like Denmark. So if you see a Danish flag, or you should watch the game on soon.
Mhm.
And
I think I actually have more of a nostalgic feeling for Denmark than I do for Canada.
right,
Even like both my children have, and I won't say my kids' names on air, but both my kids have very Scandinavian names, and even not just their first names, but middle names as well, and obviously surnames.
last name too, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, there are ties there for sure.
Right,
There's some definitely ties to Denmark. Um, well,
makes
and you
perfect
and I have
sense.
even talked about in the past about doing projects where I would fly over, we would record and then do like a language thing, and I would try to learn Denmark or Danish in a very short period of time. And so it would be, one
Yeah,
Danish person and then a Danish person returning home. I still think that would be fun, by the way. I think we should try to do that at some point.
yeah, we can look at your genetic heritage, and we can see if we can see where your great 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 grandparents came from
Mhm, mhm.
in Denmark, and what kind of lives they might have led. I'm very passionate about Danish American history in particular, because there were so many that went that way, but
Mhm.
certainly also other countries in the world where the Danes kind of went to. In fact, I actually think about creating a new podcast, probably in English, but about Danish people who went abroad, or maybe
Mhm.
even in Danish. It could be both, but because I think it's interesting that people decide to leave what is the happiest country in the
Mhm.
world. The socialist utopia. Why would you ever leave that? It's a beautiful place, right? Um,
Well, and in
you
my
know,
example, it was my great grandfather was born in Canada. So I'm fourth generation Canadian, but I'm still we follow some Danish traditions and Danish food and Danish holidays and Danish names. Like I'm named after my
yep.
great grandfather. That was his name. So I think it'd be so cool to go back to Copenhagen and then try to find, you know,
Retrace, yeah.
baptism records and where did my great great grandparents get married, and I still have family there and stuff as well that we could look up, so that'd be pretty wild.
Yeah, I think we should do that. That sounds
Mhm.
like a great project.
So okay, so you walked us through your story of going to Hungary and being an expat, and then in the UK, and then you touched on just very briefly where you are today in Portugal, but let's expand that a little bit. I want to know, what is your life like? What has your experience been like? Give it to me. I
Yeah.
mean, let's hear about Portugal.
Of course, yeah. So Portugal has been great so far. Obviously, you have to take everything right now with a bit of due to the pandemic. It has been funny because I got here in the end of October, and it was relatively open, but it was still at a pretty high point of the pandemic. Then January 1st rolls around and they put on the maximum restrictions.
Mm.
Shops close at 1 p.m. in the weekend, masks everywhere at all times. All restaurants and cafes are closed. Basically, everywhere is closed, and I think it's the same for a lot of the world. So this isn't. I'm not trying to say that we had it worse or anything, but when you just move to a country and that's the experience you have, it can be very weird. So I actually, when people tell me like, or ask me, so what do you think of Portugal? I feel like it's hard to judge right now, but I can say, despite of all this terrible lockdown and everything, it's a very positive experience. Like the weather is beautiful. Portuguese
Mm.
people are very friendly and hospitable. There's a lot of English here. I should say I'm in Porto, which is the second largest city.
Mhm.
Most people go to Lisbon, which is at the south. I decided to go to Porto because I'm not really a huge fan of tropical weather.
Mhm.
And Lisbon is almost at the same degree as top of Africa, like Morocco, and so
Mhm.
that can get really hot. But yeah, I had to set up all my accounts, and I set up a business in Cyprus. That was the best setup we could come up with, and that was a nightmare. But I think that could be probably a whole episode. So if anyone is thinking about setting up a business in Cyprus, just ask Mikkel to help you out and get in touch with the right people. And then I had this NHR, the tax-free thing. I got my own apartment in the middle of the city for, I pay about $1,000 a month in rent. This is a 2-bedroom apartment, and I've got a little balcony you can stand on. You can't sit there, but you can stand, look over a square. And around me, I think I have about 500 different cafes, restaurants. They have a huge going out culture here. People go out every day. You go for coffee all the time, and, beers and cocktails or whatever. So for me, so far, if I had to summarize, it's a really, really positive experience. And I found a co-working space. I don't know if you ever talk about those on the show, but for me, that's like the best place to connect with people who are like-minded and who are doing similar things. And in most cases, they speak very good English. So it's a good way to get in and build a little social circle. So I try to go over there every day and sit there for doing sort of normal work hours, and then come back and we try go out a few times.
Do you find that separation from actually going to a place to work and then coming home and not doing your work like on your couch or in your bed? I mean, do you think I've always been one of the people where I just work where I live. I mean, I just set up a home office.
Yeah. I think it's good it's really positive for routine. And routine has always been hard for me, because if you remember from earlier in the conversation, I was dreading routine. That was literally my fear, is to be stuck in a routine. So it's kind of funny that I've now come full circle and realized that to get to my maximum potential, I need to enforce a routine. But I don't think it's night and day. I don't think having let's say a co-working space is going to revolutionize your productivity. But I think, and I still work from home a lot, like we're shooting this from home as well. But in terms of networking and socializing, I don't think there are any better ways. Maybe some meetups, like if you go to a digital nomad meetup or some kind of meetup in your area of interest, then maybe that could do the similar thing. But I think the office is just great because you're all there with similar intentions, and you have the cafeteria section, and every day people are like, oh, you want to go get a drink over at that place, and it's just a very welcoming environment. Whereas if you just worked from home all the time, I don't know how I would even begin to socialize, especially in this environment. But for me, the co-working space is just a fantastic place. And it's usually quite cheap. I get like all unlimited 24/7 access, and, obviously super fast internet and coffee and all that. And it's only about $200 a month. So to me, that's like a bargain.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would be one of the people who would get very little work done and probably a lot of chit chat.
Right. I'm similar, yeah, sadly, but that's fine. I get the work done and a mix at home and there, but the co-working space, like half the reason I go there is to talk to people. So I don't blame myself for that, but I'm definitely the same as you in that sense.
Very good. All right, last question. Have you had some really good fortified wine, some really good port since you've been there, my friend?
Well, here's another scoop. I might start doing some content on that. But yeah, obviously port wine, this is the home of port wine. And I think it's the most beautiful and underrated drink in the world. Something that people don't know about me is I used to work in a wine shop in Denmark. So I got a taste for the good stuff many years ago. But now that I'm here, I'm just like blown away. Like, I don't know what kind of drinks you're into, but let's say you like whiskey. How much is a good bottle of whiskey? You're looking at maybe $100, 100 euros.
$100, yeah.
For a starter, I would say good glass, right? You can get a little bit cheaper. You can go higher. I mean, you can go infinitely higher. But with port wine, you can buy like a $20 bottle, and it's great. Like the quality of that is just beautiful. Like I've had, in the 6 months I've been here, I have had port wine from 1963. And that was only like, it was like $300 for a whole bottle.
Yeah.
So we split it a few people. It's cheap, and I'm drinking
And
a
it's not
product.
something you need to have a cocktail of. I mean, like
Oh
a,
no, no,
a small glass of port goes a very long way.
Yeah, and it was produced before my mother was born. Like, how imagine that? How crazy is that? And it's
That's
just
hard
it's
to get your head
beautiful.
around.
Yeah, it really is. So I would say if anyone hasn't tried port, definitely go for it. It's a bit of it has like an old man's kind of, I guess, in Denmark anyway. It's kind of an old man's drink, but I think young people should try it as well because it's a lot cheaper for the quality anyway.
Brilliant. Well, you get a bottle, a $300 bottle when I come visit, and we'll make
Oh
our
wow,
way through that. That'll be nice.
sounds good, Mikkel. Thank you.
Brilliant, Kris. I always love talking to you. I am glad that we finally got you onto the show. Amazing conversation. I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and your experience and telling your stories. Amazing episode. If my listeners want to get a hold of you, if they want to find out more about what you do, where can we send them?
Yeah, go to actualfluency.com. That's the blog, and there's a contact button there. That's the easiest.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I will make sure I have the links for this at expatmoneyshow.com. Kris, thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Mikkel.